Well, okay, Richard, I think we start for this webinar. So welcome everyone for this webinar today. My name is Silvio. I'm SPC at Rentouch, and apart from bringing the PA planning app forward every day, preparing some marketing stuff like this webinar today, talking with our customers, learning from them, I'm also part of a large transformation currently going on in Germany in the role of an RTE. We call this webinar Remote PA Planning Hacks from a Safe Fellow's Real Life. And well, you have already seen him. I'm really happy to have Richard with me today. So Richard, please feel free to give a short introduction.
Sure. Thank you, Silvio. And it's great to be here with you. So my name is Richard Knaster. I'm a SAFE Fellow. I'm an author and principal consultant. And besides helping organizations transform, similar to Silvio, I teach classes and I also contribute to the Scaled Agile framework. And I've been working with the framework for about 6 years, and I've worked on upgrading to about 5 different versions of SAFE.
Cool. Yeah. So what can you expect from today's webinar? We've decided not to use that many slides today. Instead, I've prepared a few topics regarding remote PA plannings I want to bring up, I want to talk with Richard about, and kind of sharing our experiences and learnings we have done the past weeks and months. At the end, of course, you will be able to ask questions. I expect we are talking about 30 to 45 minutes, and I have Raphael with me today, and he will help us guiding and facilitating the Q&A session at the end. So you will find a small Q&A section at the bottom of your Zoom window. So feel free, whenever you get a question up in your head, note the question down, and at the end, we will go through those questions. So, well, Richard, yeah, we've been pushed into a situation the past weeks and months where everything regarding remote working somehow went from, well, it might work, it's nice to have, towards it must work. And as I saw, that also had a huge impact on Scaled Agile, where, well, you released many new materials, new training guidelines for the customers, partners, and trainers all over the world. So how did you get that, or how did you experience that somehow change?
Yeah, it was it was very interesting, because prior to this, as much as possible, we try to do face-to-face PI planning. And we have people located in Japan, people located in China, South America, and US. And we always came together for our PI planning. And we do it about once a quarter as we're doing our PI planning. So we had experience doing some distributed PI planning, but not as much as having the entire company doing PI planning. And we run our entire business on SAFE. So our train is about 150 people, which represents our entire company. And it's kind of getting to the point where maybe we're going to have to split the 2 trains shortly. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of scrambling that we had to do. And we had to change our business model to allow remote training and figure out how we're going to do that so that our customers would be in a position to do remote PI planning, and also to allow remote training. We had never allowed remote training. So the fact that we follow safe practices and principles really helped us turn very quickly to change our business model and to take what we had learned from doing distributed PI planning to a totally remote PI planning.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah. So and that's what we want to focus today on the PA planning app itself, remote. But first, I would like to remind everyone here about why are we doing a PI planning in general? What is this magic coming up in a PI planning? So I think you've prepared a few slides regarding that.
Yes, I have. And for the most part, this will be more like a TV show versus a lecture. So we just have a few slides, as Silvio was mentioning. But we thought it was very important for everyone to understand the true benefits of PI planning. It just isn't about planning. So one of the most important things, if you have ever taken a class from Scaled Agile or its partners, like Rentouch, is that it's about alignment, getting alignment to the business goals, to the vision and the goals of the organization. Another very important aspect is building the social network that the art depends upon. So when you develop solutions, you need to be working with people. And when you have a lot of people that you need to work with to develop a solution, you need to build those social relationships so that when something happens, you know who to go to and you know how to collaborate better. Another really important thing is being able to understand the dependencies between teams. Often to deliver a feature, we need multiple teams to deliver a feature or to deliver a solution. And we have to know how we're going to do that. So we don't want to purposely create dependencies. We want to try to eliminate dependencies. And where we have dependencies, we want to figure out how will the teams collaborate in order to do that work. And we'll speak about that a little bit later. The other extremely important thing is to match the demand to capacity. What we don't want to have is a lot of work started, but not a lot of work finished. In fact, the lean mantra is stop starting and start finishing. So being able to eliminate work in process, and funny enough, most of the times it's the teams who are taking on more work than they should be. It isn't as much as the managers doing that, is that people think that they can do a lot more than they can, and then we have way too much work in process and a lot of stuff doesn't get done as a result. One of my favorite things about PI planning is before we had such an event, when you need to make decisions and trade-offs of scope and decisions about how you're going to implement something, or just get clarification about the feature or what we're trying to accomplish, setting that intent, you have to have many meetings, and that could take weeks or months to happen. Instead, during PI planning, we can make those decisions in minutes. Even when you're remote, you can still do that. And lastly, there's another important point that a lot of organizations do not do. During PI planning, we want to make sure that we understand the requirements, the strategic intent of what we're trying to achieve. Are there any changes to architecture or design or user experience that we have to do? And have those conversations when we're all together so that we're not waiting weeks later and then find out we've gone down the wrong road. So it also helps get much better outcomes. And one of the things that when you do your first PI planning is that people who do the work plan the work. And that's a huge difference from the way most organizations worked before. Often, even if you were doing agile project management, often things were being imposed on the teams. This PI planning really increases employee engagement and motivation. And when we do our PI planning, we also have fun. And so we'll talk a little bit of some of the ways that we have fun. And doing our PI planning has definitely improved predictability and time to market, not only for our organization, but you can see on the right from our case studies, the kinds of business results that people are getting. And then getting management's trust. When they're there with planning and seeing how much work the teams have and what they're trying to accomplish, then it builds trust. That transparency builds trust. And by planning our architecture, planning our testing, and how we're going to collaborate, ultimately, it results in higher quality. So I think those are the main points that we wanted to go over from what planning is about and its benefits. But we also need to look at what are the anti-patterns of PI planning. We need to understand what we shouldn't be doing. So it's very important during PI planning that we set the context for the planning session. What is happening in our business? You know, for us at Scaled Agile, we discussed what was happening with the COVID crisis, where our revenue was at, the kinds of requests that we were getting from our customers, and which things were the most urgent. So we had the right focus for the upcoming PI. Not having an aligned program backlog is a real problem. I often see that organizations are planning stories, but not features. So you really can't see the big picture if you've got all these hundreds of stories. Features are what really provides value to our customers. Those are the things that change the solutions. When you don't have business owners attending PI planning, that's a huge problem. Not only for your planning session, because you don't have the decision makers there, but also having their level of engagement. When the business owners are engaged, typically the train isn't as engaged as well. You also need to identify those PI objectives which have high risk, which may not occur. And this way we can see what we can do to increase the reliability of our committed objectives and how we might make the uncommitted objectives more reliable. Having a low confidence vote on the plan and not making any adjustments. So if people are voting with 3 fingers or less, you probably want to look at making adjustments to the plans. And what we always find is teams are often over capacity. And as I mentioned earlier, it's mainly the teams doing it to themselves. It's not managers saying, oh, you need to do this and you need to do that. It's often we take on more work than we need to plan. And often we don't realize that because we're not really looking at our load versus our capacity. And I even see errors often made in people not calculating their load and capacity correctly. And lastly, the whole reason why we're face-to-face, whether we're face-to-face in person or face-to-face remotely, is to have interaction with our business owners, product management, our system architects and business owners to make sure that we're in alignment and that we have the big questions answered so we go down the right path and that we don't go in the wrong direction for several weeks. Now, let's have that understanding of intent so that we can really create the best possible plans going forward.
Yeah, I especially like the one point with having business owners on site, and I think that's also valid for a remote, or even more important in a remote PI planning. So when I get asked when doing the product demos, and I get asked by RTEs, what do we need to set up to enable a remote PI planning, then I often say three points. So key points. One of them is connectivity. Obviously, if you're not having a stable internet connection, you shouldn't start doing a PI planning remotely. The second point I mentioned is you need to think about your communication channels. So you need to understand each other, you need to see each other. So don't go into a PI planning without having your video cameras on. Then there are channels like chats. So Scrum Master together with RTEs to have a chat, the team has a chat, product owners with product management is having a chat. And the fourth part of communication is obviously real-time synchronized board. So somehow we need to make sure that our plan is transparent across all the locations people are sitting, whether that is in an office or at home. And the third point has nothing to do with tools and processes, right? It has to do with people and interactions. And the third point I mentioned is that you need to establish clear working agreements across the teams and also on program level to make sure that you trigger the right conversations at the right time. So Richard, you have, yeah. experienced plannings at Scaled Agile. What else would you add as
Yeah,
general?
I think those are excellent points. And adding to that, what we have found is that when you are doing remote PI planning, you need more time. Typically, PI planning is done in 2 days. But when you have the entire art all remote, then you need more time for PI planning. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that the agenda is longer necessarily, but people staring at the screen for a very long day is going to be hard. So if you can do some shorter days, but do it over more days, that's usually very helpful. And some conversations take longer. There is more preparation in terms of, for example, how are we going to discuss some of the features that still have some uncertainty about them, and we want to get some better alignment about what we're delivering with that feature, whether it be from a business perspective or how we're going to implement it from a technical perspective. So what we also found was that we needed to plan some meetings in advance, some things that we already knew about that we had to speak about. And so we had scheduled, we worked with the RT and the Scrum Masters worked together to schedule some meetings in advance, as well as how were we going to do some ad hoc meetings that we hadn't planned for. So we also did that. We also needed to kind of recalibrate and let people know that we've done PI planning really well in the past, and it's going to feel a bit more chaotic this time because now it's kind of new. Before when we did PI planning for the first time, it was really difficult, and then it got better over time. And the same thing happens with remote PI planning. The first time you do it, it's more difficult, and then you realize all the things that you could have done. So make sure that you also do a PI planning retrospective to see what can be improved. We also made things fun. So in our company, we had a bunch of people who were musicians, and they had some pre-recorded some music that they played.
I saw the videos.
Yeah, and it was a lot of fun. We wore funny hats every day, and so we made each other laugh. And we try to have this, we're all in this together type thing. And, don't worry, let's just be ourselves and have lots of fun. And that really helps, especially when you're having a longer time period. So we had shorter days, but we did it over more days is what we did.
Yeah.
We had to have a main breakout room, and then we had breakout rooms. The other thing was we had a picture of all of the teams, so where the teams were virtually located, so that I could click on marketing and then I could go to the marketing's breakout room. If I wanted to speak to the framework team, somebody could click on the framework team and go there, or click and go to the sales team. So we knew where everyone was using a visual picture that had links to where those particular breakout rooms were, and that felt really good because it felt more intuitive. Like, okay, I know where to find everyone if I need them, including the RTE, including product management, so we could quickly get to them. And having, the tooling was really helpful. Having good video conferencing was really important. You always struggle when you do your first remote PI planning, trying to figure out, well, how are we going to present our draft PI plans? I need to see some of the team plans, and I also need to see if can I bother somebody. So when you're in person doing PI planning, and you see the teams doing their work, you can see whether they're all heads down and they're not ready for a conversation.
Yeah.
So doing that remotely, can be a bit difficult, but at least you can peer over and see things on their board that you might need to know about.
Yeah, well, one thing, actually, that's a really good point. I can also show what I normally suggest in that case. So as you can see, by the way, it doesn't need a touch screen to run the PA planning app. It also works in every browser. So what what we have in place here is, so now I need to, come on, those stickers. And what I often tell people when they are asking, how do we make sure that teams don't get interrupted in a focused feature breakdown, and you don't see that in a remote PI planning. In co-located, you get a sense, you instinctively know, well, it's a good time to interrupt that team because everyone is walking around, looking around and not doing anything.
Right.
Or if they are really focused on a feature breaking down, maybe having product management discussing with them, there you see, well, probably it's not the right time to interrupt them. So how do we shift that trigger points, right? I think that is what we need to be in a remote PI planning. What we need to do is shifting that trigger points that way that the receiving team or person, the person who needs the information, triggers the person providing the information, and not the other way around. So one thing I experienced is a good way to do, not only remotely, but also when you're co-located, is using stickers to get additional visuals on your board, and everyone sees, well, someone is expecting something from me as RTE or product manager. So in that case, one customer did it pretty cool. So we have different colors here, so red, orange, green, etc. So what they defined in their working agreements is whenever it's blue, it's something which belongs to product management. Whenever it's green, it's the RTE, which should get triggered. And then you can use the symbols. So let's say the orange exclamation mark would say, we do have a problem which needs to get solved in our problem solving session. If it's a question, a blue one, it means product management. When you have time, please join the team to discuss this specific feature or this user story. So I think those stickers or any kind of visuals, additional visuals on the boards really support that kind of bringing up the conversations when they make sense and when they are needed.
Right, that's great. And you could also use that similar information when you go into your problem-solving workshop.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you didn't resolve all those issues, you kind of have a list of things that you need to address.
Exactly.
So that's really helpful too. You know, and when you have a lot of tools, you know, we find that people kind of get lost because, you know, they're using Slack, whatever tools they're using for PI planning, whatever tool you use for video conferencing. It's a lot of different places to look.
Mm-hmm.
So having less places to look is great, and knowing that you're needed someplace. And you know, as you know, there's a lot of things you need to do during PI planning.
You need to have a single source of truth regarding the plan. Of course, there are chats and video, but regarding the plan, I saw release trains using, or they plan directly in an ALM tool like Jira and Confluence together with PowerPoint. And well, everyone get totally confused because they didn't know where to add what. And I think that that's really essential for a remote planning, to have one single source of truth where everyone who is looking on the program board sees exactly the same program board with the exactly the same dependencies on it. What I wanted to add, what you said, Richard, is if you're using stickers and you have kind of the search function on it, you can look for, well, not the yellow one, I wanted to show the orange one, and then you kind of get everything which is related to my role at a glance, let's say. So you can go through regularly doing, let's say, gallery walks would be the physical approach, going around, watching the boards, looking on these additional visuals, and then you see, well, oh yeah, there's an orange question mark. So let's jump into that team.
Right. Yeah, and speaking of gallery walks, you know, when we're in person, one of the things that we often do is we can visit each person's plan prior to the draft plan reviews.
Yeah.
to get a sense of what's happening and being able to see their plans prior to draft plan review. Sometimes we do it after draft plan review so that we know the details. You know, you only have a few minutes during the draft plan review to it be presented, and you often don't get the whole gestalt of the plan, especially when it's on a flip chart and you can't, you know, you're in the back of the room and somebody's holding the flip chart up. You're not able to see the detail so easily. So, you know, we often have people put things in an electronic tool so that we can read it. But, you know, then people have it in Word, in Excel, and all these different documents. And it kind of becomes difficult to manage.
What would you recommend? Because I think those, the idea of the duration of that presentations, let's say at the first morning, doing the business context, doing the product vision, I think in a remote setup, it's too long. So you need to make those presentations shorter, allowing the teams to have more time during the team breakout session. Do you have?
Yeah, and that's certainly a good point, you know, and I think there's two ways that you can do it. So, you know, we chose to do it over 3 days so that we could have the business context, because and it all depends on that particular PI. So, for example, in the case of this COVID crisis, we needed to spend more time on our PI context, you know, the business context. So we were going over, looking at the revenue, and, you know, as we saw it declining, we were talking about, okay, how are we going to make it go back up? So it's like a V. And what we're going to need to increase our revenue, how are we going to service our customers who are also in a similar type of situation? So in our case, we felt that we needed to do 3 days. Now, in other cases, you know, you might not need as much business context. So it could be a shorter period of time. And the same thing holds true in person. Often we don't give enough time for the team breakouts, you know, and you certainly, one of the things you want to avoid doing is having an all hands meeting as part of your PI planning. PI planning is meant for PI planning. And so it's not meant for other stuff that is not relevant to the PI planning or the work that you're doing. For example, maybe it's okay to introduce new development practices that you want to do over the next PI, but it's not the time for an all hands meeting.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, I agree. We have talked about the program board before, and sometimes I get a sense that the benefits of the program board is highly underestimated. So it's kind of we must visualize something on the program board instead of, hey, what are we going to make out of it? So can you give us 2, 3 main benefits we can get from the program board during the PI planning?
I just happen to have a few slides on that, Silvio. So let me share my screen. And, you know, let's just take a moment to go over the purpose of the program board. And I think many times people are just doing the program board because that's what they learned during the Leading Safe class, or that's what they learned during the Safer Teams class, and don't really understand the amount of information that's really there. Now, so some important thing is that we need to understand, when are we going to be delivering our features? So on the program board, we put the feature into the iteration in which we believe it's going to be completed based upon the completion of our stories. We need to understand the dependencies between teams in order to deliver features. And it's really important to understand the milestones that we have during the PI. As you know, in SAFE, we develop on cadence and release on demand. When you release, especially before you have a continuous delivery pipeline, there's more planning that you need to do when you're doing a release, especially if you're doing a significant release versus a minor release. And we need to have those, those milestones on the program board. If you have a user conference, as an example, or perhaps there's a market event that's happening, or a market rhythm that's happening. For example, December Christmas shopping is coming up in 6 months. We want to make sure that we understand the milestones that are needed to be ready for that. the program board serves as a visual plan for the PI. It identifies where collaboration is needed. So again, dependencies aren't meant to drive the plan.
Mm-hmm.
The program board is not a Gantt chart. It is meant to help us identify the dependencies, and most importantly, how can we reduce or eliminate dependencies? And then where is the risk in our plan? You know, you can see there's a lot of stuff going on in this picture here in the very early iterations, and that's good. If all that activity was happening at the end, it might show us that we're waterfalling the PI, and we don't want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it shouldn't be happening like that. We can also, if you can knit a sweater from all the strings that you see on the program board, that means that you probably have an issue with the design of your architecture, so that there's a lot of point-to-point integrations, or perhaps you're organized in ways which is causing all of that dependencies for occurring. For example, if you have component teams and you want to develop a feature, in order to provide that feature, you're going to need to have a lot of dependencies between all those component teams to deliver the feature. Or maybe you need to change the architecture of a particular feature because there's so many dependencies. Or it could be that you're actually working in the old ways. And an example of that is that everything has to go through a user experience group. And so every single feature is dependent upon user experience. And then you have all these bottlenecks,
Yeah.
which then may indicate to you, well, maybe we need to put the user experience people on individual teams, or maybe this is a skill that each of our teams need to pick up, and we rely more on user experience guidelines and less on them having to create our wireframes and other, user experience details.
Yeah. What you already talked about this kind of situation where, and I see that quite often, that there are teams which are owning all the dependencies, and there are other teams owning the features. So what does that tell you?
Well, it tells me there is a problem. The way that you're organized is you're not optimized for flow. And one of the reasons why that we use a value stream network in SAFe is that we can have a fast flow of value, and we want to minimize handoffs. We want to minimize delays. And usually the biggest impediment to time to market is those handoffs and delays.
Yeah.
And escalations and waiting on other teams to do stuff. We really want the teams to be collaborative. If a team has to do a feature and they need to create an API, we don't want the team that's creating the feature to wait until the team that's developing the API to be done. We want to collaborate on that together. So when that API work starts, we should start on the feature work at the same time. So we're doing things in a different way. It's not a bunch of handoff and delays like we did in Waterfall.
Yeah. Another picture I often see is, well, this one is not really a good example for that use case, but I saw program boards having 60 features on it and 60 dependencies. So, well, it was super hard to get something out of it. Of course, there are some functions like when I click on a feature and hold on it, that it shows only the dependencies and so on. But what does that tell you? Such a picture.
Right. If you have 60 features, that tells me those aren't features. Typically, those are tasks. And activity does not provide value. It's delivering new functionality, which we normally express in terms of features that is really going to provide value to your customers. And you're also going to have a lot of work in process, and having too much work in process is also going to delay you. You start losing the forest through the trees in that case. What are the really important things that we need to get done? When you have 60 features, you don't really know what's important. And one of the things that I heard today from our Voice of the Customer meeting we had today was that they found that they need to even be more focused on getting the important things done, since everyone is remote, and you need more alignment now, even more than ever, because our business can't afford to take any more hits. So we better get in alignment about what the most important things are.
Yeah, I agree. You've also mentioned the dependencies in general, and I do see many different approaches how people tackle dependencies and how that workflow runs on the boards, on those different tools they are using. So what's the workflow Scaled Agile is suggesting or recommending to follow to solve a dependency? From a team recognizes we do need to work together with another team till this dependency is visualized on the program board.
Right. So typically on the team's iteration planning boards, we normally will put some indicator on a sticky that we have a dependency that we need to resolve, whether it be on that feature or a story that contributes to a feature. And then we need to go to the other team and have a conversation to figure out how we're going to work together, and then agree, okay, how are we going to resolve this dependency? And what we found was the best thing was to have a team member from each team that has a dependency on another agree on that dependency. And when we're in person, if you have a dependency like on a feature, and if you haven't had that conversation, we would have the string dangling until you had agreement on that. So both sides need to agree to that dependency, and that's often a challenging thing to do.
Well, yeah, I think that's also what I normally, well, it's a pretty easy workflow. If you create a dependency sticky, I do have trouble with the board today. Then it's on my board, right? So I am aware there's a dependency belonging to that user story. That doesn't mean that this dependency gets solved right now. It only means, well, we do have a dependency and we don't want to forget about it. So as soon as I make that transparent to the other team, and I think that's what you're saying, on the PA planning app, it gets a red flag. And at the same time I'm doing that, if I now go to the other team, I will get the dependency on it. So both teams are aware that there is a dependency. And now that's what you're saying. One team member each talk to each other towards how are we going to solve that dependency. Of course, this team will probably have some user stories solving the dependency. And you say,
it's also, it's also important to remember that on the program board, we're only creating a dependency between features. However, flagging it on the team board helps us remind us that we need to get, that story still belongs to a feature. Most stories belong to a feature. They don't all have to belong to a feature, but we're really only interested in solving the dependencies with the features.
Yeah, that's super important.
But it's a reminder, that you need to speak to the other team.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that's what, you actually link the story, solving the dependency to the right feature, which could belong to another team in that case.
Right.
And finally, you would wait until you visualize a dependency on the program board till you have agreed on a plan. Is that correct?
Absolutely. So we need to have agreement, when is this going to happen and how are we going to work, together? And hopefully it isn't the case where I'm waiting on the other team to finish before we can start that work. Because otherwise you're back to traditional project management. You really need to think of these dependencies as not a finish to start dependency, but more as a collaboration point. Here's where we need to collaborate. And also, is there any way for us to eliminate the need for that dependency? So for example, if we've been pairing for a while, maybe our team has now enough knowledge that we can just update the API ourselves without having to have a team which is a specialty team for that particular component.
Mm-hmm.
And the more that we can collaborate, the more that we can pair, then we can just have a quick conversation with them and say, we kind of have this dependency on you. However, we, based upon our pairing in the last PI, this is what we're thinking of what would happen to the API. Are you guys okay with us making the updates ourselves? And if you have collective ownership, which is a very important practice, then there shouldn't be any problem. Now, we've just eliminated the dependency instead of having the dependency. So the idea in SAFe is to eliminate dependencies, not to purposely create them.
Yeah, I agree. Exactly. So yeah, time is running, Richard. But one thing I wanted to cover, I think it's important as well, the program board. What if we have finished PI planning? We do have two main outcomes, which is the program board plus our PA objectives. And those are not meant to get thrown away the day after the PA planning. So how do you use the program board afterwards? How does it help to execute the PI?
Yes, so we're using the program board during our Scrum of Scrums. And, we'll hold that, at sometimes once a week, sometimes twice a week, or even more often, depending on the situation. And we're making sure that each and every iteration, that when there are these collaboration points or dependencies, that is actually happening between the teams. And
Mm-hmm.
are there any impediments between the two teams working together and what we can solve? And so we're continually looking at that. We're looking at, are there any features now that are done? Is this something that we can release now? We don't, we release on demand. We don't release at the end of a PI. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but whenever you can release more frequently, you're getting that value sooner. So we're continually looking at things like that as well, and seeing, do we now have a delay in doing this? So maybe that is going to push out certain things, and how are we going to handle it? We're not trying to prevent the change, but we're trying to figure out how can we better manage the change in the case.
Yeah, what I also find helpful is, if I'm going back to the program board regularly during Scrum of Scrums, or even daily stand-ups of a team, and if I see, well, we will not handle to deliver that dependency in iteration 1, what happens if this gets moved to iteration 2, to iteration 3, and so on? So what's affected by this change? And I think that helps to understand those changes which will come up anyway. And I mean, it's a plan. It's
right.
Nothing.
And it's meant to change. So being able to see the impact of that is important. And also, how can we mitigate that? So for example, if we were waiting on some connectivity through an API to get some data, well, in the meantime, if that's going to be delayed, we can create a mock, we can create a stub. So it's more about how are we going to respond to the change, and just seeing it visually and being able to quickly see what things are now impacted as a result of, say, that API being delayed, and maybe multiple features are dependent upon that feature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
We're also looking for maybe where are we waterfalling the PI in some kind of way. Often I see companies where you see, like, in iteration 1 a dependency, then iteration 2 a dependency, iteration 3 dependency, and then iteration 4 there's a feature. And what that tells me is that company is probably still working in its traditional way, handing off from one team to another. One team does the requirements, one team does the design, one team does the development. They're not really doing Agile. So I can see I can walk into an organization and look at their program board, and I can discover a lot of things in a very short period of time.
Absolutely. Well, I would have many more topics to cover and speaking about with you, Richard, but I think we should give our audience time to, yeah, talk about their questions. I think there are a few really interesting ones. So please, Raphael, feel free to share with us some questions came up during the conversation.
Yeah, so we got one question. Well, we got more than one question, but one was, any suggestions on how to deal with people in different time zones?
Yes, so I think we could both speak to this one easily. And again, when you have people in different time zones, you need to create an agenda that is, you know, over more days, like again, like 3 days, and look for overlapping periods of time. So when you're doing your team breakouts, you want the team breakouts being done in the US and let's say China at the same time. If they're in different places, there's no time for us to synchronize. So create an agenda with all the different items in the different time zones and make sure that the different groups in the different time zones can speak to each other. But that's the whole purpose of PI planning, is the conversations and the collaboration and the decision making, the trade-offs that all need to occur at the same time. Silvio, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I also have in my mind. Additionally, maybe regarding your boards and tooling, what really helps is to, similar to what we know from software engineers, for every line of code, well, they should do comments that someone else understands why this line of code. So similar on the boards, you could use a specific sticky note, which is called note, or for the people and teammates in Japan, and then adding notes why the sticky is here and what's left, what needs to be done. So that could also help to deal with time zones.
Right. So sometimes you have to have more written communication
Yeah,
as a result.
that's what I mean.
You aren't always able to have overlapping time periods. So, for example, sometimes we record the business context, and so that we're going to play it in the same time in US and China. For China, they would have seen the video in their early, or the US in their early morning, and China can see it also in their early morning when we record the presentations.
Yeah.
Also, you need to schedule some meetings. Be more mindful about when do we need to meet with the other geographies, and how are we going to do that. Another big thing is don't focus all on the main group and not on the other remote groups.
Yeah.
So nothing is worse than, because everyone is typically in Colorado, we'll have all the Colorado people go, and then we'll do China and Japan, especially if it's late at night on their end. You know, they're going to be really bored and not feel engaged.
Yeah.
So you need to make sure that each of the different locations is engaged by asking them questions, by trading off. We'll do a draft plan review in this geography, and then a draft plan review in a different geography, and things like that. So people are feeling that they're part of it. And you need to have more checkpoints as well, and to see where the teams are at. Also, people knowing where we're at. So making the calendar visible and making calendar changes to the visible, and you might need, sticky notes, or you might need a Slack channel or other tool like that to announce what schedule changes are. When do we need to be back for the draft plan review? When are we going to be assigning business value to objectives, so that everyone knows when they have to get things done by.
Yeah.
And a little bit more guidance by the Scrum Masters is always helpful to keep each of the teams on track during PI planning.
Okay.
Then we also got a question: with 135 people on an ART and 100% of them working from home, what is the best way to visualize the program board view?
So I mean, it's really, the program board view would be the same as if we were in person and as we're remote. The big problem that I've always seen when we had distributed PI planning is the fact that being able to see one picture that's in sync. So in one case, we would have one team in one geography having their own program board and another team in another geography having their own program board, but we don't have a picture which shows everything together.
Yeah. It needs to be the same program board. As mentioned before, it needs to be a single source of truth. And regarding the amount of people, 135 persons, or did you say 200? No,
135. Yeah.
I would expect that's around 10 teams, let's say. So 10 teams, probably between 10 and 20 features. So that's should still be enough space to visualize the plan. What I often see is that the larger the release train, the more features coming up on the program board, the more crowded it gets. And that's, as Richard mentioned, that's a sign that those features are, in some cases, stories. I often see features with 1 or 2 stories. That's somehow also a clear sign that, yeah, you might have 2 small features and you need to work on the shaping itself.
Right, and you may not really have an aligned program backlog where everyone is bringing their own stuff in. And today, more than ever, you need to have alignment on what you're going to be doing over the next PI. You know, we can't afford to be going in the direction for a PI. And so we also have checkpoints, in our PIs, in our Scrum of Scrums, PO syncs, to see what adjustments we have to make to the plans. Because, PI planning is a plan, but we're going to change the plan as we go along. Each and every iteration, the teams are going to adjust their plans. So we also need to be looking at that during our SOSs and PO syncs as well. And once a train gets really above 100, I've really found, perhaps it's time to look at how we can split the train into 2.
Okay.
Of course, that introduces other issues in terms of cross-training dependencies.
Yeah.
But you have to, so I guess, for example, if you have to listen to 15 draft plan reviews and you only care about 3 of them, well, that could be really boring and people start, tuning out. And they're like, why am I here for all this time? I don't need to hear those other 12 plans, So look at splitting the train as well at some point.
Yep.
And then we have a short one, I think. How can I start to use this tool?
Well, yeah, piplanning.io, or even better, trial.piplanning.io. We do provide a 30 days free trial, so feel free to register. And if you have any questions, just drop us a mail or write us on the website.
And the last one, I think, what should we concentrate on when running a virtual PI planning simulation prior to the actual PI planning?
That's a good one. I definitely suggest to do a dry run, especially if it's the first time. And what I would suggest, don't use productive data. You should not focus on productive data. You should focus on your working agreements, on your use cases that people get trained how to behave during, let's say, a feature breakdown, or how do we behave when presenting the PI objectives. That's what I would suggest at the first place, not using productive data. But apart from that, similar to what we know from the SAFe trainings, do block 2 hours, run through the main use cases, and also probably do a retrospective afterwards to already learn from that experiences, and that you can already do improvements for the real PI planning.
Yeah, that's really great advice. And also with the video communications, it was our first time that we had 150 people on Zoom. We weren't sure if Zoom or Google Meet, would be able to handle that many people. Would there be a lot of delays? Also, people's home laptops, their home internet connections. By doing that dry run, you can identify whether or not there are problems with people's, and maybe they need to upgrade their connection or have the internet provider fix something. So you can't underestimate the need to even just test that. How are we going to go into our breakout rooms? How are we going to return from our breakout rooms? How are we going to, when we want to meet with another team, how are we going to signal that? Sometimes we need more in-depth meetings. For example, to go over architecture or go over the requirements for a certain feature, or in our case, what was the business decisions are we going to make around changing our business model around remote training? So you need to have more planning, especially on your first remote PI planning. You want to make sure that the infrastructure is, it just feels like you're picking up a telephone and you're there. You know, same thing with the planning boards. People need to feel comfortable with the technology so they're not fumbling around.
Yeah.
It's for some reason when you're on a large call, a lot of people, all of a sudden, when you've got a lot of people watching you, you forget how to do the simplest things. You know, like even just sharing your screen, or how am I going to share my things on the program board, you know, using your tools.
Muting the microphone when not speaking.
Right. Not presenting when you think you're presenting, you know, so it's like, oh, Richard, you're not sharing your screen. You know, you're on mute. You know, all the things that we see that happen all the times. Yeah,
that needs training. Raphael, do we have another question?
No.
No, so I think we're pretty much on time, Richard. Well, that was a great experience together with you. I hope that you'll learn something for your PI plannings, got inspired, and as mentioned before, whenever you have a question, feel free to ping me. Richard is available online, sometimes a bit busy, but anyway, he is doing the best to answer your question as well. And yeah, please feel free to provide us any feedback, and yeah, hope to talk to you soon. Thanks, and thank you, Richard, for your time today.
Thank you very much. And if I just add one last thing, Safe Distilled 5.0 is now available on Infomit, you know, so people can download the latest book. Cool.
Thank you, and see you soon.
Thanks for having me. This was a really fun session. All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.